Hi, my name is LeiLani Cauthen, and I am a EduJedi Leadership Society Grandmaster, proud to be one. Lots of EduJedi members out there with their plastic lightsabers. Probably going to be listening in either right now. I haven't checked the attendance, but I know a lot of people listen in post with the recording. I'm also the Learning Council CEO, news media research organization. So we do a lot of big surveys. We've done just one in January. We're in the middle of our big national right now, intaking responses. And some of what we're seeing is really surprising. So part of this work today is Activity 6, the customization of the digital learning universe. And so we have with us for part of this discussion, this sort of working discussion, is Heather Hurley, good friend of ours, instructional software specialist from Loudoun County Public Schools. Did I say Loudoun right, Heather?
Yes, you did.
Oh, yay. Okay, great. So good to have her with us, and she'll give us some background on what's going on with them. And then also our good friend David Jarboe, who's the Executive Director of Technology and Innovation from Harrison School District 2 in Colorado. Good to have you, David.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, good to have you. And then we have Dr. Wendy Oliver, Chief Learning Officer from Edison, and also Brady, who is with us. They're going to give us a little background to kick off the conversation on what's going on with the professional grade scene, and that will allow us a little bit of an underpinning to the whole conversation. Brady's the Director of Instruction and Advisement from Edison. So Wendy, you want to give us that intro right now?
Sure. Thank you so much, LeiLani, for having us. We are so excited to get to be part of these conversations and to help with defining some of these terms. EdisonLearning has been around for almost 3 decades. And, you know, one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is working with districts as partners. We don't consider ourselves a vendor or someone that you have a contract with. We really try to work with you closely to help you personalize learning for students. We have over 150 courses in middle school and high school. Another thing that makes us unique is that we have instructors who we can partner with you to help teach courses for your students, or if you have maybe 5 students that need a distinct program, you can have them enroll with us directly, and we have teachers certified in a variety of states in which we work. So we have a lot to offer. Really excited to work directly with districts and to partner. We also offer professional development if, for example, you have teachers that are new to working in the blended environment, and I know we have a lot who are over the past year. So we also have advisors and guidance counselors. We've been doing a lot in SEL, as I'm sure anybody would expect, given everything that we've been through. Really excited about that. And LeiLani, we will show some examples of some of the dictionary terms that we're going to work through today. Okay. This particular one, we'll go through and show them as we work through stuff today. And I would rather do it in context so that we use everyone's time very effectively. So we can just dive in.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for that. And then, you know, on this whole focus that we have today, we're really talking about how schools are going to be reimagining their foundations for how they execute on delivering learning. And we all know that the blending of learning is real. We all know that a lot of school districts are doing simultaneous teaching. You got kids in front of you, you got kids remote, and then schedules. There was a big time and space warp in terms of who's where, when, and teachers working from home and some students remote. It's gotten kind of wild out there. So I want to start just with our special guests, Heather and then David, sharing what's happening for them right now. I think that's a really great place to start. So Heather, over to you.
Well, I can kind of give you a little background for being 4 weeks in my new in my new school district. But I think it's probably the same much for anyone in any school district, is preparing for students to come back to in-person learning with a very uncertain future, not knowing what things are going to look like, and trying to make sure that we take some of those lessons learned from the pandemic and bring them forward. And so for us, that is making sure that we're staying consistent with the focus of our district's goals and initiatives and some of the tools that we put in place that were great to facilitate distance learning, but can also be just as well utilized in the classroom. So in Loudoun, there is a big focus on deeper learning. So deeper learning is allowing learners to become capable of applying what is learned in one situation and applying it to different situations. And in Virginia, we have the 5 C's of a graduate, which I think most people are familiar with those 5 C's. So you have the collaborator, the communicator, the creator, critical thinker, and contributor. So anytime that we are putting experiences into place, tools, whether they're digital tools or non-digital tools, we want to make sure that they are supporting those particular skills. So that's as we've been moving forward. One of the big things that Loudoun had put in place just before the pandemic had hit was a learning management system. And so you think about all that can be done with a learning management system. So that's been a big focus as we've moved forward now, is making sure that it's still being implemented with fidelity, that it is being used to support learning, and can help kind of get us to those goals of deeper learning in those 5 C's.
Okay. All right, great. And I think we should also mention you had, when you were with Arlington, also a title that focused you on personalized learning.
I
right?
did, and it was a new title for the district at that time, and it really was a matter of trying to change those learning environments. In the way that I did that was more from a kind of grassroots effort with cohorts of teachers to begin examining what it looks like. As we know, personalized learning can look very differently, and encompasses many different things. And you even have the definition, between the personalization, individualization, and differentiation. And that was a big focus of the work that we had done with the teachers. And I can say that during the time when we were out of school, the teachers that had gone through my cohort actually had a much easier job shifting themselves to that online environment and being able to kind of manage all of those different student needs, because they had been doing that in their classroom through the lens of personalization. So it was extremely helpful. And my current district also has several schools. They actually had started doing personalized learning before Arlington had. They were one of the districts that I investigated when I was trying to decide how to begin the process in Arlington.
That's awesome. So that's a big win for you, knowing that you helped
Yeah,
set people up for not knowing there was a pandemic coming, but it was. And yeah.
exactly.
Well, thank you. All right. So David, can we get a little background on what's happening for you out there in Colorado?
Oh, absolutely. We are actually back in school. We started the school year last week, and that is our primary mode right now. Anyone that wants to be in person obviously can be in person, and that's what we're encouraging. But because of the result of experiences last year, we know that families wanted some more options. So we did start a K-8 online virtual academy this year. And we have, I think, just over 100 students right now enrolled in that. So that is one option that we're offering. So our personalization really is choosing, where you want to learn and when you want to learn. At both high schools, we're offering a blended learning program where students do most of their education at home, but do a check-in a couple times a week. We also have a strong concurrent enrollment program, so we have students also attending our local community college, either in person or virtually at the same time. So a lot of what we've done was to take some of the flexibility that we provided last year and continue as an offering to our families if they choose that.
Awesome. So you've entered the world of the matrix,
Yeah.
where, right, kids can be like over here and over there and affiliated partially, and then they're all over the place.
Right.
That's awesome. I see that as a really important competitive move right now. So would love to get a little bit more detail on that as we go through this. All right, so let me start off on the discussion today. So we all know that we're talking through the editing and edification of audience right now on the EduJedi dictionary. So the idea is that, you know, teachers love to customize and individualize. It's how you do it with the technology where, you know, you're doing it so that every individual is getting something from that. So we'll start first with what this category is. And I Heather, you just really did a good job of distinguishing between what is individualization, what is differentiation to customize for groups of students, and then personalization. These are definitions that not a lot of people use. It's okay to meld them all together probably, but personalization in the consumer commercial world is what you do as an individual. It's, I'm going to pick out my own avatar and make it have blue hair and blah, 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 and I'm going to go down my own paths. So I always find that there's a little bit of discussion on that particular point. Heather, do you want to say anything about that?
I do, because this was always the piece that was the aha for teachers. I used to do this activity. So at the time when Bray and McClaskey they were together and they had their list, and it was their PDI list, and it showed, you know, personalization, and these were the actions, differentiation and individualization. And what I used to do for the activity is I cut off, there's one line that goes along the top, I cut it off, and we cut all the pieces, and I had them, okay, put the ones that you think should be personalized, differentiated, and instructional. And they always got mixed up until I gave them the headings back. And the headings were the teacher will versus the student will. And that was the switch, because with differentiation and individualization, it's the teacher making the decisions. I need to put students in these particular groups in order to give them, you know, the content that is at their level. I need to work one-on-one with this student individually. The personalizing is where the student is making the decisions on the type of content they want to study, or the mode in which they want to study it in, or how they want to demonstrate that mastery. And that was always the switch. Unfortunately, it's also the hardest to do. It's very easy to differentiate and individualize because you're in control of it as the teacher. It's much harder when you're starting to put that control into the student's hands. And that's kind of the difference. So it's always been hard when technology tools have kind of said that they are personalized learning tools. And I think you're probably going to get into that when we start talking about adaptive. Is adaptive personalizing? Is it, et cetera? So that was always how I started every workshop.
Yeah, I'd love to grab your workshop and turn it into a national game we play when we're on the road.
I think we'd have to talk to them about it, but
yeah, I think that'd be super fun. Because you remember the games we used to play when we came out, right? Like we would always have like a little workshop in the middle of the day, using big Lego blocks or whatever. Right. Okay, awesome. David, anything you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I totally agree with you know, what was said, and I would say, you know, I like the comparison of individualization is really maybe where the differentiating comes in, and the personalization is where students have voice and choice, which is, and those do frequently get mixed up. And now we're throwing artificial intelligence in there through a lot of platforms who claim to be able to do it all. So we'll see where that takes us.
Yeah, I always like to caution everybody in the game, there is no magic button. There isn't ever going to be a single system because, you know, when you enter the software world, everyone's doing updates at every different time. And yeah, the magic box, I don't think is ever going to truly exist. So Wendy, Brady, what are your comments on this conversation from that professional grade consumer side stuff?
I think it's great to differentiate. Here's a question that I would throw back at you. So this is personal experience, Wendy talking. So one of the things that I did, and it was more of a passion project of mine, is that I wrote a book for parents because I think as we transition children into digital education, I think myself included, as a former leader of a state education program and a district program, I don't think that we educate parents well as we put their children in digital. And so as I look at these definitions, I keep thinking, how would I explain this to a parent? And I also think about that because at EdisonLearning, we are doing a direct-to-consumer, because a lot of parents are looking for solutions too. And I think, how would I explain this to a parent, these three different definitions, without it being overwhelming? And I wonder, I don't know that it's a fit, but I wonder, does something like that need to be added to the dictionary? What words would we use? Because a parent understands personalized. So if we say to a parent, your children are participating in digital content that where we're differentiating instruction, or our online instructors or our classroom instructors are using the technology to individualize learning for your child. I don't know that that makes as much sense to a parent as it does to a teacher. So what is the word for a parent to make this clear?
What's interesting about that, Wendy, is that I don't even know if I would have approached it from the tool standpoint either. It would have been, this is the concept that we're, trying to address or trying to teach, and these are the tools that we're using. But you make a really good point. So trying to think of when I would explain it, I think I would try to explain when we're saying adaptive or we're saying, fixed and such, it's that it's me or the program taking what the student is learning and then adjusting that ability to them. And or if it's myself, it's me taking that data to be able to then do that differentiating or do that individualizing. But I don't know if I would come at it from the digital point. I think I would just come at it from the content point overall. I don't know if David has a different way of saying that, but I also agree with you that we probably don't do enough educating of parents of what all of this stuff means.
But I think, another term might be responsive versus adaptive, that the teacher or the system is responding to what the student is doing and trying to adapt or personalize or individualize them. And that's where all three of those can kind of come in a complete system, because you do want to be able to do all of that for the student to really move them forward.
Yeah, and parents understand the Netflix model, right? You can say it's like Netflix and they get it. But I like responsive. I think that's a great way to characterize it, and then you can bring in those three definitions. And that's one of the things that the pandemic has really done, is parents feel much more empowered and informed, I believe, and they have a choice. So that's why I always try to put on that lens of what do we need to tell parents? I love responsive for that.
Yeah, and I think that sums up exactly what we do at EdisonLearning with our teachers. They're super responsive to the students and the students' needs. And obviously we're going to get into some of that as we go through these definitions here. But that is one thing when we are working with students, really personalizing or individualizing, I guess is the correct term there, their education with this, working one-on-one with the teacher. So.
Okay, thank you. I made a note, just so everyone knows, that we should bring this up when we get to the numbers of activities that are coming later that are about the digital experience standards, because there's a set of standards for the learner side that are also sort of parent-learner focused, and I think that we probably are going to need to add a standard in there. We'll have to figure out how to word it and, use the word responsive, and maybe all these words get defined in that, because it is something that now that so many school districts are leaning on parents, that their involvement needs to be, informed. So I made a note that we're going to do that. Okay, so let's move on to the definition of adaptive. We have here that it's automated systems provide gated. I think what I need to do is turn over to our working document and move through that to the right section here. These are all the definitions we just took up before. So adaptive is has a gated mechanism. Now, the definition of gated is elsewhere in the dictionary. Not all adaptive systems are gated so that they have a human intersection. Some of them are like they just automatically route the kid to the next thing. Any conversation we want to have around this particular piece?
I think this is the one that at least when we first started implementing personalized learning, this is kind of what people thought it was, that we were kind of sitting kids down, everyone on one computer or one iPad, working their way through a program, and the teacher doesn't have any input or anything to do with that. So I think it's important to be sure to let folks know how an adaptive program should actually work, and that it doesn't mean the absence of an adult in the classroom or in use.
Okay, making a note.
That's a great point, because it's so critical that the teacher still be involved, or if this, even if it's in the role of a facilitator.
Right.
And as I looked at this, LeiLani, I was thinking, is it important to differentiate between gated and adaptive, and maybe show the difference? Because gated means you're not going to be able to move forward until you complete those adaptive pathways. So I don't know if that would be helpful for a visual for the folks that watch this, but I know that Brady can show the differences there if that helps understanding conceptually what's happening with the technology.
Yeah, let's do that now because we're recording, so other people that watch later can see that. Yeah.
Right screen. So for us, like here, if I go to our course map, you can't go to the other lessons until you complete the prior lesson, right? That would be a gated process or mechanism. But if we go through back to a lesson, we have these lesson objects that we can go through here in our program, where a student, if they go through, let's say, these first 3 objects and they take the assessment and they do not pass it, our system will reroute them to a reteaching. So they go over the main concepts again and get into really those trouble areas, for example, where they can explore those common misconceptions. And this is math, so if we're looking at real numbers and on a number line, not knowing what some of those definitions are, especially when we're looking at classifying numbers, and maybe switching up natural and whole numbers, they can go back, get into more detail about that information, and then move forward and try the assessment again, and then it goes back and forth.
And what I always like to say about the gating, lesson learned for anybody who's new to online learning, you don't realize how important gating is until your first experience, where you realize the kids skip all of the instruction and they go straight to the quizzes and they fail them. And then you realize, oh, wait a minute, and you go in and you figure out what gating is, and you go back and you learn, right? That's one of those first lessons learned. You always set up gating because that forces them to go back and work through the content before they take the quizzes and tests. So I just thought it was important to kind of see the difference there and understand how the technology is working.
And Wendy, even with like in Loudoun, we use Schoology, and in Arlington, it was Canvas, but you can even put those same things on the content in an LMS. So it is that same, like, I can't just hop to the end and take the quiz. Yeah. I need to work my way, and I have prerequisites before I must complete A before I can move to B.
And it's a pretty standard feature, right, in LMSs. So thank goodness.
Yes.
So I think what we're saying here is that we need to separate or modify the way we're saying gated in this, the way the original EduJedi wrote this. Wendy, I'm going to lean on you and Brady to maybe craft a new definition here. You know,
Okay,
take
sounds
this and alter it, and then give us a screenshot of Brady what you were showing, so people can get the differences here. Okay, so let's go to collections. Any other comments there? David, we haven't heard from you. What are your comments on this?
Yeah, I would just caution, because it says it's confusing because there is no truly adaptive engine right now, but I think there are some out there that are truly adapting and not just gating. In other words, responding not only to the progression and the pacing, but also to the learner and their interactions, and you know, working on that remediation on demand or just in time versus just a single track that students, you know, kind of fall through. So I think the technology, I don't know how this term was defined, but I think some of the technology is now claiming to at least be truly adaptive to how the student responds, outside of just pacing.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Brady was just showing is that at the upper level of the student in their courseware, the student moves through and then they take the quiz. The system can see what they missed. And then there isn't a gate, there's an automatic shunting to reteachables. So that it's sort of like it's two levels for them. But what you're saying is that the really fully adaptive at the upper level maybe doesn't exist. I think maybe in some of the math programs it sort of does. I think Dreambox maybe.
Dreambox and maybe Carnegie Math, I think may have it.
Yeah, I think, but it's not maybe what you're saying, David.
Well, what I'm saying is it's in real time and not just opening and closing gates that are predefined, but really, I mean, some of the newer sophisticated applications are looking at error analysis and can actually interpret students' writing or how fast they're typing, or, you know, the response time. There's just a lot more data now available and going into what applications can do and how they can respond to students. It might just be a nudge, hey, start paying attention again, if they're not responding as expected.
I think, David, the machine learning is driving it more now, as opposed to subject matter experts defining those pathways based on specific responses, right? So that's where that data is in there, and it allows the machine learning to define it. There are systems, I agree with you, that are in place that are doing that now. Absolutely.
Yeah, but what also you're saying is that the depth technologically that it could go is not really defined here. Like there are systems I know in the testing field in the universities that, you know, they literally will track your eyeballs as you're answering to make sure you're not cheating. And then, you know, the pace of response, that's another, because that would run a back end development timer, you know, on how so there's a lot of depth there, is what you're saying.
Right, because in this it says no digital curriculum was known to be truly adaptive. So that's where I think maybe have moved ahead of that now.
And does that tend to bleed into some of these other definitions that we'll be talking about later? Like, has adaptive actually morphed into something else, or does it still have its place?
Yeah. Okay, and then I also want to add, because I think, David, you alluded to this, is the fact that it might be adaptive, but it's still going down a linearity of path alternates. You know, there's three ways you can screw up, and these are the three remedials, rather than a truly adaptive, which would use algorithms or AI to find the correct resource. In other words, sort of open-ended AI that helps, and that is coming, and I don't think it exists anywhere yet that I know of. Have you seen anything like that, David?
Well, I mean, a lot of people are slapping AI onto their products now, from refrigerators to cars to education. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think there's it's still being tested and proven.
LeiLani,
Okay.
as I listen to you saying that, and I reflect on what Heather and David are saying, I'm wondering if there need to be different definitions for adaptive.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, there's truly the definition of adaptive, but how is it being used in context? And right, because the term adaptive is used very frequently, but is it truly driven by machine learning? And then the answer to that is not that often yet. We're getting there. But I think that's what I'm hearing is maybe different definitions need to be included in the dictionary.
Yeah, I think potentially right here there's a scale of sophistication. So it's a multiplex definition. So like I said, I'm going to ask you guys to draft that, and then I'll edit it, and Heather and David maybe drag you back into the fray to vet it.
But we're drafting the adaptive definition and the scale of multiplexity. Did I just do that to myself, LeiLani?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
you
don't
did.
you love being on these calls? Like I just gave you work to do. It's awesome. Okay, so okay, so let's go to collections. So we kind of know what collections are? Does this need more, or do we leave it alone? So software collections are, like all of the libraries of things, and many of them now offer pre-testing for Lexile or Quatrial. Okay, now you're let into the library at your level with modification or customization by the teacher to let you go a little bit higher than your level and a little bit lower than your level, depending on what the teacher wants to do. So are we familiar with that? Okay, so let's move to IEPs as the next thing. And I think, oops, went too far. I think, Brady, do you have something to show us about how a system does this, converts the individual as an aspect?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, LeiLani, on that one, just a question as we were reviewing that definition is, so we have a system for the planning process and how the actions can be selected. So is that, I was wondering if there needed to be clarity on, is it the selection process and again, have actions to be selected, or is it actually allowing the physical IEP to be managed within the system?
Carla Burkholder from Schertz-Cibolo Universal wrote this original definition, and I think it's missing some of those aspects.
Okay.
And I wasn't clear. Are we still talking about IEP as in special education IEP, or I was a little confused, or were you saying that there are software products that are creating kind of individualized learning plans for students? So I was just I wasn't sure what this definition was lending itself. I mean, I know the general definition of an IEP, but I wasn't sure, were we talking about it in its strictest sense in terms of a special education document or something different?
I think they restricted the way it's written here, not to define the entire universe of IEPs, but to define it within the digital curriculum dictionary, because this was originally called the digital curriculum dictionary. Okay. I think possibly we do need the full definition of IEP, which I will put a note here to add.
Right. I mean, I just think of, right, because generally it's not used in a general ed sense. And that's where I was trying to, but there's nothing in here that says anything particular about special education either. And, when most people read this or see it, they immediately go to special ed. So I didn't know if there needed to be a distinction between an IEP and a student learning plan, which is slightly different, which has places where students, I mean, they're both similar. We always say, like, you know, we would love every student to have an IEP, really, because it's their own goals that they're working on, and such. But for the purpose of this, does there need to be two separate definitions? I don't know.
Yeah, because we immediately went to 504, right? Because we have instructional services and work with students. And that's a huge intake that we process. And we have to make all those adaptations. And then also, you know, making sure that the curriculum meets accessibility requirements. But then as I reread it and now I see the personalization, then certainly I understand how it could be the individualized learning plan, which right. And if it was learning plan, then I would read it differently, but I automatically went to 504. So that's an excellent point, Heather.
And it also depends on how a district, when I was originally looking at different models and visiting some school districts, I remember going to one school district. I was in a third grade classroom, and this little boy, we said, "What are you working on?" And he literally whipped out his IEP goals and showed us what he was working on, which is how you actually want a student to use that document. I think so often we do this as adults, but we don't really include the kids unless they're high school and they're involved in their process. But we don't usually then sit down and say, these are your goals. This is how we're going to map them out. This is, you know, how are you going to contribute to that? So it was so startling to me. I think we often go to, oh, it's privacy, you shouldn't be showing this. But it's all in how a district, I guess, chooses to use this information. So I had to bring that point up because it struck me, because there's not anything wrong with it. Every student has goals to work on and can tell us how they're going to address them.
And like Wendy said, yeah, our initial thought was 504 plans, IEP goals, what we can do in the system to help the student be successful. So here is just a snapshot that we use with our clients, but it lists a lot of the things that the system can do. You know, adaptive questions, adaptive answers, course mastery, study planner is such a great thing. Just letting kids know, hey, these are the assignments that I need to get done for your course, and this is when I'm going to get those done. And they can adjust those as well. That way, hey, they want to be done 2 weeks early before the end of school. Let's put in that new date. Let's adjust that and adjust our study planner to meet that goal. One thing that we'll talk about in a little bit as well is just getting to know you questionnaires. And one thing that I always encourage my teachers to ask their students as they come in, hey, what's your goal in Algebra 1 this year? What do you want to get? That way they can work with that student to meet that goal. And, you know, asking them, you know, hey, where are some areas that you've had trouble in, let's say, math again, you know, that I can help you with? Or, you know, how do you learn best? That way they can, when working with the student, when tutoring with them, when providing feedback, they can do it in a way to personalize it to them to meet their goal.
So I would agree that probably shouldn't use IEP in the sense that it's being talked about here, because I do think everyone goes to IEP as a function of special education, where I think when you read this definition, because it says in software systems, that it's talking about the functionality of software to develop an individualized learning plan for students versus, you know, the federal IEP. So I would recommend renaming it maybe.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna I think there's a comment here from Deborah. So Deborah commented about this being talking about the software product alone. And so what I'm gonna do now, and David, you just said this, is essentially move this to maybe pathway planning, and then sub it with IEPs. Terry Vest said PLPs are used for them, personalized learning plans, and then distinguish between the PLPs, student learning plans. Are we talking about accessibility? There's a lot of work that needs to be done on this definition, in other words. Okay.
I do think it's also important, as Deborah said, there are software programs that now most, it used to be when I taught special ed a long time ago, we typed them up, you put them on paper, you wrote them. So there are the programs now that allow between IEPs, 504s, et cetera, that can allow multiple people to be in it. So I do think it's important to keep it in there, but maybe under that guise of the software.
Okay. All right. So perfect. So I wrote that down too. Going back to the screen so we can get through these final definitions. Let's go to locked or fixed pathway. I think we've talked about this already. Is everybody in agreement?
Yeah, I think that followed under one of the means of trying to be adaptive.
Okay. Let's go to loops and branches. And I think if it's okay with Edison, I'm going to move on to that one to show loops and branches, just so we have a definitional visual there. This original one was written by an executive out of Houston ISD. One of the administrators there, she's not there any longer. Okay, go ahead, Brady.
There. Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what we shared earlier, those loops and branches, right? If we weren't successful looping back to that content, but if we are successful going down a different avenue or a different path, I think, David, you talked about this with some of that machine learning software that was built into some of those programs, that understanding where students were having specific errors and then getting into those errors with the student. A lot of these pathways. Go ahead. I love this. Am I muted?
No, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I love the loops and branches. I'd love to see more of this in education. I think that's a way we need to go, especially when we're talking about personalizing and individualizing education.
What I think is particularly powerful for students is if they don't, for example, achieve an 80% on a formative assessment, they can go back through the reteaching, and that gives them the opportunity for RTI before they move back through and advance. So it's a really effective way to scaffold.
Okay. I think we're good on this one then. Does anybody have any dissent on that, or we'll move forward? Okay, going once, going twice. Multiple language translation. I'm taking the screen back. I know this is really a hot topic in the West, particularly here in California. You have to have everything in Spanish. I've had an administrator in Salt Lake City tell me they teach to some 81 languages now, so they want everything, basically. Any comments we want to make about this in programs?
I would just say it's very easy to add a language pack to your curriculum or your content. Most LMSs have them. So, we have one. It's got up to 100 plus languages that translate. So I think that's a good definition, and it's usually just a plugin that you add.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't know many of the LMSs that actually convert the core of their development structure. you might be able to convert the guts that you're putting in, the actual content, the resources, but the framework system is still all in English no matter what you do. Am I right? David, have you seen anybody, or Heather?
I was pretty sure that it changed it.
The framework of it, so that the students
so.
navigating in their own language?
I thought it did, but
a lot of that's done at the browser level. So the major browsers have a translate function, so that would translate any HTML word, verbiage into their native language. But I don't think it would go through and like change every worksheet and every, activity or test necessarily, especially if it's already in a static print environment. That's one thing I always try to remind teachers, is to keep things HTML as much as possible and rely on the browsers.
Okay. I think this is going to evolve, this particular one, over time, but I think we'll leave it for now. I think we've already gotten into personalization, so I think we're okay there. And then the last one in this section, and then I think there's some new ones potentially to offer, is work product curation, which has another definition that we've already gone over in another session on proofs. Is this a thing for your schools so far, the ability to store for retrieval and teaching students how to tag their own stuff so they don't lose it and it goes into some wonky filing structure? Is this a thing? David, I want you to go first.
We've talked a little bit about students having a digital portfolio.
Okay.
So that is something that our LMS can facilitate. I wouldn't say it's the most beautiful curation of it, but it does have that where students have files. They also have, we use, you have your drives like Google Drive or OneDrive too, that also would have that ability to curate and keep student products over a long period of time.
Okay, Heather?
I would say the same with David. Between the LMSs that have portfolio options, generally our elementary students, a lot of them will use Seesaw, which is generally a digital portfolio platform, but we don't have, both here in my previous district, don't have like a systemic, that portfolio system where students' work is going from grade level to grade level. A lot of times the portfolio features in the LMS are used for our students like in CTE, or to be able to put work samples, examples of what they're doing to be able to give to potential employers, for them to be able to show what they've done. But in like the tagging and such is a little different. Like I look at that as like, how do students organize their things to be able to find it for later and such, and that's a whole nother skill.
Yeah, we will be taking a little bit of that up in the digital learning experience standards for students, those responsibilities, because they are a thing that has to be taught, Okay, so I think we're good on this section, which is great. It was a short section. And I think that one of the things that I would like to have all of you discuss is maybe we need to define some word or words around defining what is the human intersection in software. Like what are we saying is the point that a human intervenes and customizes? I think there should be a word there.
But if you go back to adaptive, right, I think that it came up, I think Heather was the one that said it, how critical it is to reiterate that the teacher is still involved. It's not just the student and the software.
Yeah, but what I think what I'm saying, maybe I didn't say that right, is there are systems that are totally consumer oriented and there's no teacher needed. We know those are in the app markets. And then there are systems that always they're essentially built to make sure there's a human intersection and there's gating and everything else. So what do we want to call these versus the other ones? Can anyone think of a word there? Putting you guys on the spot, you're like, okay, we'll try to create something in there because I think it needs to be done. Are we in agreement that maybe that needs to be done because there's confusion in the field between, you know, what is the stuff that is like a game, teaching kids the alphabet that just does everything, and the systems that do, you know, they force the teacher intersection.
I guess my thought on that is how, without any interaction, how do we actually know that they're learning it?
Well, that's when
see
what I'm differentiating here between here is the consumer level stuff
and
the stuff you guys know.
Okay.
Because parents don't. And
right.
I actually have seen now more and more schools using consumer level stuff. You know, there's teachers all over the place that rogue put their kids into apps all, you know, without asking, and this goes on. And those things are sort of gamified, teaching you the alphabet, teaching you to, you know, verb differentiation, math programs, all kinds of things. And they are adaptive, like little modules of things that you can do. But they don't intersect with the teacher. Most teachers look at them as remedial, like, you know, they're flashcard animated stuff. So I think we need to differentiate between what is the things that are over here in this pile and what is the pile you guys really know, which is obviously intersecting with teachers. So I will work on that.
So kind of
Okay.
related to that is, you know, as we talk about artificial intelligence, which to me really is more assistive intelligence, assisting the human, which is kind of what you're driving at, that we want machines to help us, not to take our jobs. So it's almost like you have machine learning and maybe human learning, because I say every teacher has their own algorithms that they use, that they have developed over the years. I mean, you take a year 1 teacher compared to a year 5 teacher, they're using totally different algorithms on how they, you know, interact with their students, how they prescribe learning. So maybe it's machine algorithms and human algorithms. I don't know. I just know it's a similar process, really. But you know, the humans are learning also with the machines.
Yeah. Okay.
Like machine guided versus like teacher guided. You know, as you guide them through their educational journey, you know, a teacher might see some things that, hey, they're lacking here, let's take this route instead of that route. Where a machine, you know, it's going to calculate the path to take based on the data given, is kind of how I think. And, you know, you're going to go through those guideposts as you go through your educational career. And obviously there's different avenues to go in each of those periods between guideposts.
Yeah, and I think there's a spectrum here, a scale, you know? Okay, so we'll work on that as well. Okay, so the only last thing I want to bring up, and we have just a couple more minutes left, is I believe that the idea of what we're looking at right now, customization, also involves something. I'm going to harken back to the early minutes of this event with David, is that his district is working on customizing the schedule and the path for individual students in a not associated to the traditional way we managed grade, class, and whole group. So some students are being customized to with this individualized pathway that is essentially maybe you're on campus twice a week and the rest of the time you're online, right? Instead of going with the straight up bifurcation between you're either a campus kid or you're an online kid. And maybe you have that bifurcation, but you also have this blending thing going on in the middle. I think there's a scale there somehow. I'm a big scale person, you can tell. But I think that we need to define that within this arena of customization from up here at the scheduling level. So what would we want to call that? This is my last question for you guys. And I also, Wendy and Brady, maybe you guys could weigh in, because commercially you're selling either content or content plus holder, right? In an individual course package or all the course packages, or you're providing, you have your teachers teach it, or we'll step in and do some of the teaching. Maybe we'll just do your extracurricular. It's sort of like this all over the map thing. And that's what we're seeing as Learning Council happen all across the country, particularly in the extreme rural areas who can't get teachers. So I think that there's something going on here in this warping of what used to be traditional or online to sort of an intermediary mix of, anytime, anywhere you can affiliate. Oh, maybe that's the word.
If you were to look at
affiliation flexibility.
I was just going to say, if you looked at the blended learning universe, they have a flex model, which is somewhat similar to that.
Okay.
Where students can be in all different areas. So they have a couple of different models so it is a version of blended.
Okay. Yeah, it's almost straight up consumerization, right? It's like, I'll pick when I want to be there. When my mom comes in for yoga class from my 50 miles out ranch, that's when I'll be on campus, and otherwise I'm not going to be.
Sorry, I was going to say, and you're finding school places that are starting to build. So if students are virtual, but the school may have like areas with like businesses almost that look like a Starbucks type of environment. So if a student needs to come in to work with a teacher, or wants to use Wi-Fi, or wants to collaborate with other students, they have a place to go. But like you were saying, it's on their time. So I may want to be in today, but tomorrow I want to be out. So
yeah, we've been loosely calling those houses, like Harry Potter World.
Yes.
House Gryffindor, House Slytherin.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Heather. Yeah. David, what are your thoughts? Because you're in the mutation pattern now.
Right. And really it's, and this is happening in higher ed too now, extensively. I don't know if you call it learning mode or modality, because we have, the blended, the supplemental, the hybrid, and then I think what Heather was alluding to is sometimes called high flex model, where students can choose to be in class or be synchronous or asynchronous, as long as they get the material, and can demonstrate mastery. So yes, there is definitely a continuum of offerings now in order to be adaptive to what students need as far as, their schedule, flexible scheduling.
Okay, good. So we're going to work on putting a definition for that, whatever it is right now. I got to figure that out, but in this section. So this has been awesome. I think we got a lot done. I feel really proud of us all for doing all this work. So thank you guys so much. I want to ask you to make, your final comments, and Heather, you first.
I just want to say thank you for involving me. I'm always happy to talk about personalized learning and such, but I think it's really helpful just looking at this for someone who's just new coming in, doesn't necessarily know kind of all the buzzwords, so to speak. And again, like Wendy was saying, parents, I think this will be extremely helpful. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for helping us. And David.
Yeah, I want to also thank you for the invitation. I do think this work is critical because so much can be lost in translation between the way terms are used. So being able to have these definitive terms, I think, will definitely help the educators and parents and students as well, because that's our goal, are the student outcomes.
Good. Thank you. All right. And Wendy, Brady.
Thank you so much for letting us be part of the discussion. This is great. I was taking notes frantically, so I appreciate it very much.
Good.
Yeah,
Thank you for being with us.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity. And just go off what David said. I think it's super critical to have these terms and have common definitions so that we're all on the same page, and so we can communicate with our parents, and so they can better understand what their student is going through.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you guys all for the hard work today. And until next time, I'm your host, LeiLani Cauthen, and thank you for being with us for this EduJedi activity. Goodbye for now.